All right, good morning, everybody. Looking forward to speaking to you over the next hour about marketing. That already tells me something about all of you, that you get up in the morning on a Sunday and to go hear about marketing. That's awesome. I'm Felipe Thomaz. I'm a professor of marketing. I work at the Said Business School as my department. I'm a fellow at Kellogg College. I am director of the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative. We can talk about that later. I'm director of our diploma in artificial intelligence for business. So I deal with technology, I deal with marketplaces, and my research kind of covers all of that. And you're going to see quite a bit of that today. What I wanted to do is to paint a picture of where modern marketing is and where it's headed. Part of that conversation is to clarify what marketing even is, right? It's unfortunately a difficult and misunderstood science. And I find myself kind of stuck in the middle. If you think AI is itself misunderstood as a complex set of technologies, marketing is misunderstood. So I'm in the middle of these two things that are poorly defined and trying to make sense of it all and actually making good use of it all. So my idea for today and what I'd like to do is a few things. First, I want to stage set and explain a bit of marketing. I'll share with you my definition of what it is. It might disagree with the vast majority of practice. I want to give you a little bit of history so you get a sense of how we evolved before we go into the reality of what actually things look like. The reason I do this, and it happens somewhat often, I've had students come into my class and say, I love marketing. I'm really good with color theory. And then they're really confused about all the numbers, probabilities, and things that we deal with in the pure mathematics of it all. So I just want to explain what it is that we actually do and how, frankly, dangerous it is. Then I'm going to share a few different projects of mine that are new technologies and so on. Hopefully I will leave you on a good note and share a little bit of the power of what we can do with these sets of technologies, because I don't want to ruin everybody's Sundays. I want to actually kind of end up on a positive note. So with that said, so we have an hour together, so we can have questions at the end. That's not very normal for me. People never let me go too long without questions. So if you have questions, you can stop me. I welcome it. I actually thrive in discussions. I might actually ask you questions along the way. I might be asking you a question relatively soon, and there's a quiz at the end. That part's a lie, but the questions coming and participation is important because we want to have a discussion about something that frankly we deal with from the day that we're born, and it's a constant part of our lives. You've been marketed to your whole lives. And you've marketed yourself your whole lives. Even as a child, when you're trying to convince your parents for something that you wanted, you engaged in marketing. So it's an inherent core aspect of us as humans. And it's actually very important when we deal about scarce resources, who gets what, which ideas dominate. If we can fight for dominance in some marketplace, in some set of concepts, all of that matters. So engagement on that. So I'll start with my very first question. Is marketing the thing that is the main problem with the world? Among the signs is this question of how evil is Felipe? Right? So how much of the world's problem? So you might look at over-commercialization. You might look at overstripping of demand. You might look at stereotypes that are made pervasive throughout the world. All of these things have a small amount of behavior inside of the marketing concept. These are, at times, consequences of what marketing has done. What is our share of evil? How much of the problems that are in the world are marketing problems and this sort of negotiation? Fine. I don't see anybody jumping down accusing me of breaking the world. So far, I think that's pretty good. Okay, let me enumerate some things for you. As a rough estimate, 45% of everything you see is an ad. Globally. What would you do with that power? If I gave you the opportunity to talk to the whole population globally, and 1 out of every 4 words you controlled, what would you get? What would you do? Let's try to get a scale to that. We are currently spending about $1 trillion a year in media buy. So that's about, when I say media buy, is to purchase that TV spot, to buy some space on a website, so when you see it, to put an ad on your mobile device. All of those things are just considered media buy. We'll then spend another trillion in measurement and making sure that that trillion was well spent. And then we'll spend 2 trillion in organization and management, all the salaries and things associated with deploying this technology, deploying this message as well. About 225 billion of the first go to Google. Right, so we're starting to see some of those names come up, and you're trying to get a sense, why are these companies so big? Why are they important? It's not your search, it's this, right? It's not the information, it's their ability to deliver advertising. If this were a country, now I know in terms of GDP, this is part of the economy of a country, but how large an economy globally would just advertising be if this was a separate country? Any guesses?
100 trillion.
And so just the 4 trillion together, if that was your GDP, how high rank would you be? Third.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, it's
Yeah.
world GDP is.
Oh, yeah, it's 107. So as a country, we would just be behind the United States and China. The UK is 2.8. So just a bit more than just us trying to figure out how this works. It's a tremendous amount of power. So how can I take this and what can I do with it? So I'm going to pick on some colleagues that we like to pick on while here in Oxford. Here's what can happen. Now, I wouldn't use this example if it had been Oxford Analytica, right? But since it's Cambridge, we can go and just poke some fun at them. If you're not entirely familiar with this group, this is out of Cambridge Research, looking at personality matching, and essentially a number of individuals, like 270,000 accounts on Facebook, did a quiz to see, oh, what's your personality type? And they used that data to get more data from those people and all of their friends, and they used that information to manipulate US election and the Brexit vote. Not a big deal. That's a marketplace for ideas, that's a marketplace for votes. And we use that technology to kind of shift, nudge, and organize the marketplace to get the outcomes that we wanted. Marketing was doing exactly what it wanted. Maybe without your permission, maybe without your strict desire. But thankfully we learned from that mistake, and this is no longer a threat globally. No, so that's still happening. So this is recent as of, well, the reports from September 5th. That turns out that several influencers in the United States were just paid by Russian parts of the Russian government to create content to disrupt the overall election that's going on in the US. Elections are really fun to watch because kind of all the lights go off and just craziness happens in the world of marketing. So what I want to point out is like, maybe there are things you should worry about. And I wanted to point out a little bit of the absolute sheer power of this science. And having a proper understanding of what marketing does supposedly can steer you an election. The reason I bring this up is because as a misunderstood science, it ends up in a paradox. The same person will say that marketing cannot have their data, Marketing cannot have their information. Marketing steals elections. Marketing can shift the world. But marketing is also a waste of money. So those are the two things that I hear all the time. This is the root of all evil. This will destroy the world, but I won't spend a dime on it because it doesn't work. And people have this cognitive dissonance that it's both worthless, but also the most powerful thing on the planet. Let's go with somewhere in the middle. I'm going to scare you of how close we are on the power scale and how not worthless this is. Let's have a look at the companies that are involved. Who are the ad networks? Who are the names that are involved? And this will be important as we look to the future as well. And hopefully this will signpost is a little bit of foreshadowing of what is the direction of marketing? What is the direction of the world going with this technology? There's small companies. I wanted to see if you recognize their names. So these are the main players in advertising. Startups like Google, Apple, Amazon. Now, Amazon should also be of interest to you, right? It's almost suddenly learning that your grocer is the biggest tech player on the planet. Now we know that they started then making most of their money from their technology provision and all of those things, but they have, let's go. What do these companies have in common that makes them valuable? Data, right? Why is Amazon so interested in all those things? And entering new markets and how they can predict entry into new markets so well is absolute complete knowledge of individuals, right? We'll come back to that because data, turns out, is very important for the future. And controlling that data and protecting the data and keeping that data to yourself is the basis of all modern competition from these companies and all regulation they're trying to pass. All right, so all of the examples that I gave are largely just tied to advertising. And that's like a small fraction of what marketing brings to the table. It's one of our tools. So there's a bit more. This is also, if this were an exam, this is the hardest question that I could ask you. Give me a precise definition of this. It is utterly difficult. It's been debated in academia for like 80 years. Just to give you a sense, one, maybe, academics just like fighting, point well taken, we will argue with each other over very, very small minutiae, but actually putting a boundary on it is really difficult because is that political fight marketing? There are no goods, there's no money, is that a marketplace? Is a market for ideas a marketplace? It acts in the same way and it has the same theories that generate the same predictions, but there's no money. If I'm not selling Coca-Cola, am I doing marketing? That's often kind of the attack that comes with these ideas. It's complicated and this is why. So as I put it here, and I like to use, because this is contested in Oxford itself, Oxford is a very classic education place. And I introduced myself, I'm a professor of marketing, and often if I'm meeting, a professor in Shakespearean studies, they'll just turn around and walk away, because why would they waste their time with the marketeer? That's such a beneath them, right? But it is this unpure meta science. It is an unholy chimera of foundational sciences that all must be accounted for and respected. It is utterly complex and beautiful in that complexity. Because it is not just one thing. It is, you have to simultaneously understand all of psychology, all of sociology, all of economic thinking. That's insufficient. You need to actually model this in some way. You're actually talking about economic decision-making. So we'll take them and their findings as well, but properly modeled through mathematical proofs, statistical models, et cetera, et cetera. That's the joy of it. Once it's also, as a social science, it's dynamic. Our society is evolving and changing over time. So you have to account for that dynamic specs. It's not like physics that you measure something and it's kind of reliable. Findings from the 1950s don't hold quite as much as they do today. And we need to revisit. The social structure might be the same, the human psychology certainly is the same, but once you add all of these components together, it's a very complex and beautiful beast. Now, the other thing that people don't like is that we make it applied. We just don't talk about it. Our role is to actually explain it so people go on, do something useful with it, right? And we can put it in the physics terms, like physics can be theoretical. And you can just do amazing quantum models and things that actually we steal, and I'm actually deploying quantum mathematics in marketing. But once you do applied physics, sometimes you get big booms. Sometimes you get energy, right? Like there's value in that application is the same for us. Sometimes you get energy, sometimes you get booms. And it's very much that. Historically, we are the unwanted children of economics. If you think back, so you might recall if you had econ classes, and my apologies to economists of simplifying your science to a single graph, but you spend enough time on that graph that I feel justified. It's this aspect of supply and demand. You're worried about how much will people produce at a given price and how much will people consume at a given price. Now, and then if you don't know, this is their near theological point, their point of worship, the equilibrium. That's when everything works, you have the supply that meets demand, demand that meets supply, the world is correct, everything is well, we can go home. Early history, so this is 1900, supply is all that mattered. If you control supply, you control the market. You don't have to care about demand generation. If you're the East India Trading Company, you control the entire supply chain. Monopolies, you control all of production. You can ignore demand if you control supply. And then people like me showed up and like, what if I want to play with demand? What if I want to understand what shifts the demand curve? What if I want to ignore your holy symbols and I will not accept your equilibria? What if I can shift your equilibria? What if I can break your stuff? That's why we're not light, right? Because everything that we're going to talk about is a natural process. As humans, we do marketing organically. We name things and we talk about things and we share information. That's branding, word of mouth, and information transmittal. All of this happens without manipulation. But if you know how all of this works, and this is where the applied comes in, is saying, this equilibria doesn't work for me. I want this equilibria to be somewhere else where it favors me. I want to win this election. I want to win this marketplace. I want to sell more than my competition. So you manipulate these lines, not the supply, but the demand, in order to get the outcomes that you desperately want. So that's the rise of science. And then everything kind of changed with the internet, and then Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, Web 4, what web are we in now? I think we're roughly getting into Web 3. And why is so Web 1, one-way communication, but wide web transformation, the internet arrives. Web 2, we're suddenly in social media land and there's two-way communication and so on. Why do marketers care so much about this? Why would my entire science change with that? It's the same answer you've given me previously. Data. Now, I no longer have to ask you what you think. At all. There's a funny thing about humans. If I go and ask you what you think about like touchy subjects, what kind of answers do I get? Really untrue, bad ones, right? If I go, how much money you got today? Are you saving money? Everybody's saving money. Everybody wants one of each product. Every self-presentation, our identities, our desire to show that we're interesting human beings that are into all sorts of topics, which is inherently true. We're boring and we like the same things over and over. Makes marketing and manipulation of these marketplaces really difficult. But if I have unfettered access to all human behavior, choices, and thought, I can now do really good mathematical modeling. I can do really good empirical work. I can do it without actually interacting with the world. So I'll scare you on this one. This is no longer a valid data entry. But when Facebook started, I received a data pull from early Facebook. And I know it was early because one of the entries was for user 00001. Which would have been Mark Zuckerberg's private messages. And they tend not to send you that stuff anymore. One of the fields they had was something that was considered abandoned thoughts. Now imagine that you're really angry and you're gonna write a post or a personal message on a Meta platform. They weren't Meta then. And you just type a 500-word essay and you think better of it and you just delete it. Well, that 500-letter essay is retained as data as an abandoned thought and then processed as data. Now, no longer used, but they wanted on Facebook, that was a thing. And that's the sort of digital dust that has fueled the rise and explosion of marketing, right? So let me give you my working definition, how I think about the field. And it's not clean, it's not perfect, but this is my particular hill. As a science, it is concerned with human decision-making processes and understanding choice. Those choices are often taken to satisfy a human need and are often resolved through a market process. It's not clean because we can argue over what a market is, and there's definitions within definitions. What is a human? We can go forever. But that's how I think about my world, with tons of caveats, right? Our unit of analysis is varied. It can go from understanding you as an individual to groups of people to whole populations. The unit of analysis doesn't matter to us. I frankly spend a lot of time at firm level and see how firm competes in marketplaces, and I spend very little time in psychology. But I have to understand all psychology if I want to understand corporate strategy, which is the insanity part of it, and domains. Wholesome demand, unwholesome demand. By luck or insanity, I was the first professor to work on marketing problems inside of the dark web and to stop criminal organizations in those markets, including human trafficking. Is that marketing? It was a marketplace and I destroyed it. So it seems worthwhile. But what we do have and what makes it a science is this formalized structure and understanding, including proofs. We have our own theories, we have our own understanding. We're not just an application of everybody else, but we are our own thing. We're really worried about causality because we're interested in application. So mere correlation is kind of dangerous. We want to know that the stuff that we predict and the interventions that we desire will materialize. And that brings me to my next question, which is uncomfortable. If I know this much about you, and my science is paid 4 trillion a year to manipulate a marketplace to get the desired outcomes. Now we could get really philosophical. I'm not going to do that. But I want to make you uncomfortable around what constitutes the conditions that drive your choices. Are you really in charge? Are you reacting to a set of conditions and optimizing to your preferences? But if I know your preferences, do I know exactly what you're going to do? If I slightly change or tweak your preferences, do I get to change what you will do for me? Let's see. So we have an understanding, and this is where I dive into some of my work, and numbers will pop up, so apologies. There's differences, heterogeneity across humans in how easily they are to influence. Okay, we'll call that data. The value of data is how easy you are to shift from your position, your opinion on any given topic. Just for understanding, the higher the value, the easier you are to shift, and the lower the value to negative, the more stubborn. that person is around a topic. And people always ask, so I'm gonna give you some curves. This is data over age. So you can see that under 18s are about average. Why would I not know or really understand about child choice? Sorry? Yeah, data protection. One, I won't have direct access, or they lied on TikTok to get their 13-year-old account as, you know, they're all born in the 1900s. Or their parents are making the choices, right? They don't have as much agency that we observe. So I don't know. As they enter the marketable age, they go up and they become easy to influence, shift. They're exploring, they're finding things that they like. Maybe the toothpaste that their parents always used is not the ones they're gonna buy for the rest of their lives, and they're gonna try new stuff. So for a while, they go, but then as we age, we just become set in our ways, and it's gonna be harder for you to shift from stuff that I know. I've formed my preferences, I've formed my beliefs, you're just not gonna shift. So over age, we see this very predictable curve, and this is over about 1 million people that were measured. But that's only about 20, age is 21% of you as a human driving your flexibility on this dimension. The other that people always ask me is, are men and women different? Yeah, maybe a little, but not enough that I'm worried about. So if you look, it's about 3% of you as a person is a gender characteristic, and women are more difficult to shift by the slightest possible margin. So men just go along with stuff. What can I do with this? Well, I can measure the power of all of the various tools that I have as a marketer to change your mind. And that's what my spaghettis do. So I'll start from the bottom. What we have at the very bottom is the distribution of 1 million humans across every possible choice on their ability to be influenced. So you can see that it's weirdly normally distributed around 0. I mean, you kind of expect that. This is a z-score, so you actually want something to be by standard deviations away from the mean. But then you have a cluster of people that are really stubborn. And you have a cluster of people that are lemmings. Right? So over here, I mean, let's be honest, we don't want to be necessarily all the way over here. It would be utterly punishing to be a human that does whatever every stimulus say. It's like, would you like some coffee? Yes, please. Shall we sit outside? Yes, please. All right, I was thinking of going to Manchester right now. Yes, please. Right, like we want to have a little bit of self-control on whatever stimuli we have. But then it's interesting that we have this organized cluster here on very difficult to shift people. Now, the other interesting thing that I like is each one of these lines is an intervention. Something that I can turn on to change your mind. And what I have is differential levels of power to change your mind for different interventions at different levels of difficulty. So if you're a lemming, right, it doesn't really matter what I use to convince you, they're all roughly the same. You saw an ad on TV, you're gonna do what it says. A friend tells you about a cool thing, you're gonna do what it says. Hey, I seen on TikTok, you're gonna do what it says, right? In the middle, for the average person, highly variable sorts of power. So if you just draw a line, you see that they're all slightly different, all the way to this purple one here, the average person would be here, at about 60% chance, if I use that tool, there's a 60% chance that that's gonna tweak you from your decision making, right? And very, very variable power on the really hard to shift people. So I know that this purple thing is amazing for the hard to get folks. This orange thing is really amazing to get these individuals, and everything else kind of collapses. They ignore. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to show you. And I'm going to show you how it's changed over time, because that worries me. Because it maps to some changes in human behavior that concern me.
Is the British population, or is this has culture also influence on this?
This is global.
Global.
Yeah, so it's like 50 plus countries or something, 1 million choices that were observed and influenced across 72 different interventions. So it's pretty robust. But it does vary across some of the contexts, and it varies a lot on what the choice is. So the weird things like, can I get you to change your deodorant? Is really hard, but I can change. It's much easier for me to get you to change your car. Right? It's like the cost difference you might expect that otherwise, but no, like those preferences are ingrained or not. The frequency with which choices are made also impacts those livelihoods. So there's that.
That's the average. Does it vary much between different cultures, what the shape of those curves are?
No, so what the shapes will be relatively the same. There are always going to be this S curve asymptoting to 1.
Dispersion.
Yeah, so the slopes and their discriminant power is going to vary. And the idea then with this is once you know these and you have the measurement, you just create the right portfolio of actions to get somebody to flip, right? Which in our world might just be called media planning. Except it's not thought of it that way. We can have that fight later. Most of them just think, how do I do advertising? They're like, oh, talk to people 18 to 25 and this, like they're just doing audience construction. They're not thinking about influence. We'll get to that at some other point. So here's the relative power of things split by time. So what I have here is the 2018 to 2020 band, and then the 21 to 2024 band. Some of them are really stable in terms of power. Let me pick on one for just to mock people. Influencers. If you get an influencer, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get out of the way, folks. There's a 7% chance that an influencer will get somebody to change their mind. I mean, I like it because their name is influencer. And well, and a magazine ad is 15%. So seems like old media is not dead, right? What's the other news? I missed it now. The other one is, I'll just invite, oh, it's not here, it might be inside of print. Things that are consequential. And I feel compelled to say it because one of my really good friends is a strong believer of the power of news to influence society and to have proper, safeguarded, honest news. News has been defunded a lot over the past couple decades to the point that they lost advertising dollars and they're having to do pretty silly things in order to stay afloat. Largely because they believe that this power of news to actually influence consumers as an advertiser was nil, which is a complete lie. It turns out they're actually a really powerful avenue for people to actually find influence in that sense. But yeah, the lack of knowledge on that is potentially causing some really bad societal issues. What I wanted to add, and apologies, it's at the very, very bottom, I should have thought of that. Word of mouth, human to human conversation, talking to your friends and asking their opinions, or their friends just, out of the blue giving you their opinions, whether you want it or not. Used to be 50%. One of the, if you look, the single, after dropping the price, right? The most powerful tool we have is getting somebody to recommend, somebody to talk to you, somebody to share their opinions, all of that. It's collapsed. It used to be, have 50% likelihood to change your opinion, it's now to 35. Now, to me, that's worrisome. Everything else is somewhat stable. You see things moving in 1 point, 2 points percentage. Massive things like, massive changes like a brand's own website or anything that you control as a news source, your controlled channels went up 6 percentage points in power to change somebody's mind. But your friends have dropped dramatically. Now, the first hypothesis when I presented this, I said, well, influencers, they're not listening to their peers, they're listening to influencers, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't account for anything. What it actually, to me, maps to is a societal level change in how people communicate. And the stock and belief that they put into that communication. Things have been changing dramatically in that sense and in that world. Do you all remember been exposed to, is it the 6 degrees of separation game, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever?
Yeah.
You can get a message from any human to any other human in 6 jumps. I love graphs, so that's a game we play. With the onset of Facebook, that's gone down to 3. That has dramatic, and I keep using that word, but dramatic implications about information flow inside of a human system. The perception of majority of an opinion changes dramatically with that level of connection. There's actually some very interesting papers showing that if you control a minority part of opinion in the population, because of connectivity, you might appear like the most popular opinion to somebody that doesn't see the rest. Because of this overexposure, you get a sense that, which allows for manipulation. The other thing that I'll point out is that in itself, the word of mouth process is another choice. So we're modeling a double choice here of what we will do, but then the choice to accept a recommendation or a conversation, or the choice to transmit information. Those are human choices that we're modeling as well. But just to point, so we have this in terms of getting you to prediction and power to influence. And that's research from this year that's becoming a tool in the marketplace. But that's psychology. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, 2 slides back.
Yeah.
You showed one of the curves, the purple curve.
Yeah.
Was the one that you used to get the recalcitrant
Discount word of mouth.
Yeah, which one's the discount? Okay. So,
Yeah, money.
So recalcitrant people are subject to.
On average, drop the price, and then the other one is your peers.
Yeah.
This changes dramatically across, and this is the global model. So this is, if you don't know anything about the category, if you don't know anything about the choice, this is what holds. If you go to any other category, the variable power changes. So if this was like your choice about auto, actually talking to a salesperson is the largest thing, and it would be like in the 80%. Right? Which is weird. It's like, oh, salespeople are actually doing the most work. It's like in modern world, yeah, very much. But there are diffusion models that would predict something different, like the Bass diffusion model would predict something different because of your exposure in the market and so on. So caveat, Anton, so. Yeah.
Data trying to reach out with psychological aspects like trust and likability and reliability.
Not with this yet. So we haven't connected it to like personality constructs or anything. What that means is that this is gonna be kind of in the error term. So we're not kind of mapping to that, so it's an observed variable in that sense. But with the million or so observations that we have here, we're still pretty confident we're capturing the intent component in power, but not to be able to shift that. On that, the reason for that, just to be clear, is it's interesting theoretically, but it's really difficult to action in the real world because I don't know your personality, or I won't have the data. But with this, I will have information just by virtue of presence. Yeah, sorry, I'll go here and I'll come back here. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask in regard to word of mouth, is that literal word of mouth, or does that also include if, for example, someone posts on their social media saying, oh, I went to this amazing show last night, or posting a photo of somebody going, oh, this is the best product, or whatever?
This would have been individuals that communicated with close others. So it could be a different venue, so it could be face-to-face, it could be analog. It could also be digital as long as they classify as a close friend, not just a tweet from a stranger. Yeah, so you need that personal connection underlying to qualify as word of mouth.
So you see one of your close friends has posted saying they went to this venue, they love it, and you respond to that in a different way to how it influenced.
For sure, because your likelihood of accepting the message changes depending on the underlying trust mechanism. Especially because my belief is that you know me better, so your recommendation would be tailored to me and with my best interest in mind.
Is this for a consumer or is this the same for business to business? Does it matter?
I don't know yet. So the question is whether this holds B2C, B2B. My hypothesis, a priori, that would be identical. The reason for that is that I have yet to find B2C and B2B differences. It's the same human processes. What you have is a buying team that is doing this as a portfolio. So the buying team is just gonna do this. And we'll call it different, word of mouth, or it's not an influencer, it's a top leadership, but it's the same process. I'll go here and I'll come back to you.
Thanks. So how would the power dynamic differ if you bundle these three channels? Assume if you were to deliver discount over email or via influencers, does it change dramatically because you can't just offer discount that way?
Yeah, so we do have, it's not shown here, but we do have a combinatorial problem, which is really fun. So these things have individual power. And once you put them in a portfolio, just like any other system, they would have interactions where they would change their individual power by mere presence of the other. And that interaction is not just dyadic, meaning two items interacting, but bundles interact. I didn't put it in our presentation here, so I don't have the graphs to show. But you can have, we did a subset with 11 interventions, and that's what, 2,047 different combinations or pairs. And then if you go to every triplet, quad, and so on. I'm gonna show you one example of how to manage that. But yes, interactions in pairs, triplets, quads, all of that will affect the end result. And to simplify that, because it becomes a huge thing, we do a thing, at least in our research group here, in leveraging and using archetypes to essentially simplify a high dimensional space into areas. And then we grab an area of combinations to say this combination of things, this motivation really well, or changes some aspect of your mental process really well. So we try to simplify that combinatorial explosion problem. Otherwise, it's really difficult to do. The econometric collapses because you don't have enough data for all the interactions.
The age
Yeah.
differential, and we have aging populations in many, so, I mean, I don't know, the spending power is going up, the age change, shall we say?
Yeah.
Does that actually also influence some of the change? Because we think automatically in the younger population being influencing these changes, but how much of the older and the aging population
Quite a
are
bit.
doing that? Yeah.
So I think this will change dramatically, right? So our underlying population level distribution of influential ability is going to change. So lots of things will change as a result. But if you're saying this is our fundamental truth, this is what the world we operate in, this is going to change over time. And like I was just, we just had an investor from Japan who had that very significant concern, saying actually we have a very different distribution. What can we, or actually we work this way? And you go like, actually, then how do we do any intervention, not just sales interventions? I'll show you, you know, if you want to do something for the SDGs and you want people to change their behavior, they won't change. Right? So if you want to actually people to recycle or save water or do anything, well, there's no, what interventions will get them to do that? It's that power that we're trying to get and we're losing it. Let me scare you a bit more before I try to make things better. That was psychological in a sense. It was individual level, single human's decision making. And that's kind of like, you know, economists just found that part. So economists just discovered psychology, created behavioral economics. It's all the rage. They're rediscovering kind of things from the 50s in marketing. This is going to happen once they realize that sociology matters and you listen to your friends, right? So it's not just you, but the people around you shape your behavior. Here's a game we're going to play. I'm oversimplifying the technical aspects, but imagine that you have the capability to map an entire social system. every person, every channel they speak in, every emotion, every topic discussed, everything in a complex graph. Right? If I have, there are companies that sell things called social listening. So if you take all of their social listening data and you put it into this context, into this giant graph, you have a map of every conversation about every topic at any given time. And this is one representation of a graph. Which one is this? I think this is Amazon. Anyhow, the game we're going to play is we're going to look for items that are in the periphery. So this is, if you look, this is organized around centrality, which you might look as importance, relevance, how many people are interacting with it. And we're going to be interested in two movements: items, ideas, people, topics that are in the periphery and becoming more central, more relevant to everybody else. So let's think of it as relevance for today. Irrelevant ideas that are quickly becoming relevant, trends, and the evolution of the system over time. So I can try to understand what behaviors might become normal in the future or expected in the future, okay? All right, now we're gonna do that with COVID. Oh, sorry, one step further. We can't do that with a normal graph. We're gonna do that with something called a hypergraph, which is just a more general version. All that it does is, rather than having pair of items connected, you are my friend and we have a connection, I actually can draw a circle around several things, and all of those things can exist simultaneously. If we try to form a graph out of this room, we would have a one-way connection between every single human in here, and it would be just this one massive, dense, hard to analyze thing that looks like we're all best friends. Or I can draw just one giant hyperedge, a circle around it, a cluster, and say, I don't know the relationship form inside all of this, but all of us co-occurred in this room, and there's information that all of us chose to be in this space at the same time. I'm gonna leverage that so I can use more information and make better predictions. COVID. COVID was weird and difficult because suddenly we lost all of our historical data, and the government was saying, I need predictions about the future, but you can have one day of data. It's like, okay, thanks. This was the result of trying to solve that problem. So I'm gonna just reminder, with apologies, revisiting unpleasant times, but week 5 of COVID, we had our first 2 cases in the country. Week 10, there was the first death that was announced. And week 12, we had the first lockdown. That's how kind of fast things kind of escalated. And we were given the first week of data on social listening, and that we modeled to say, what are the behaviors? And I'm gonna say, what is periphery and what is becoming the most important? Now, there's 2 important questions I could have asked. What is the most important item? And what is the most important grouping? Like how I grouped all of us. So I actually asked for that hyperedge. What was the most important or becoming the most important collection? And I'll allow you to interpret what that means because there's some level of analysis required. So in that first week, the prediction for week 4 was the combination of forums, panic, masks, home and work. What's the human behavior expected from week 1 for week 4? Forums is where the conversations are happening. So the most common places people were having like Mumsnet or other sort of forums like that conversations. The tonality of the conversation was panic. And the conversation was about wearing masks, going to work, staying at home, things like that for week 4, right before the first death. Week 10. At week 1, panic, toilet paper, shops, forums. So we projected that graph to the future and took a measurement while we were still in week 1 and said, in 9 weeks, the most important thing for some reason is toilet paper. What happened that week? There was a run on the shops and there was no toilet paper to be had. Right? There's a predictable pattern because we observe the conversations actually having a tendency from being periphery items. How many people talk about toilet paper online? Surprisingly a lot. I always have our time showing those examples, like the number of fans on X or Twitter for toilet paper brands is like too large as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, it exists and it was moving and a concern and shortages were a concern. Now that gives you time to actually improve supply chain and kind of course correct. But at that time, they're still trying to,
How do you predict that from week one?
it's this game. So what I have is I have a social map that is just week one. Using the billions of data points from that week, I can see the dynamics of the graph itself.
In the week?
Of the week, and I project the graph to week 2, week 3, week 4, and then I take measurements of where things are in place and where they're shifting.
You saw the trend in the week one.
Yeah, so that it was coming, so as this evolved to its version of week 2, week 3, it was moving towards central and said actually by week 10, that's gonna be the most
Is
important.
that trend during the week or is it a trend of a single day against background data?
We could do, that was with week, but it was because that allowed us to start get the evolution of the social system.
Right.
But we could do with one day,
Against the background.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. So what I want to take away from this is that, yes, like this stuff is complex. It's multiply determined. We make choices not just because of one stimulus, but context, who we're with, our current budget. The best example is like we've all experienced it. If you go into a dinner, theory predicts that the person who orders first is going to be the one that has the highest utility. They're going to be the happiest because they didn't see everybody's orders before theirs and they didn't change their mind. So even that choice of like, try to order steak when 6 people before you ordered salad, it's actually socially really difficult to do. But essentially what humans are doing is this bounded optimization, given everything that you know, all of your preferences, your values, your culture and everything, you're trying to do your best. It's just that people like me understand those boundaries and reshape those boundaries so your choices flow where I want them to flow. And that's how that works. So it's complex, it's data heavy, data rich. So, if only we had a way modern to deal with lots of data and complexity. Enter AI. Of course we have this. The beauty of it is AI is to me a megaphone. All of the things that we do when you put AI to it is just gonna scale it. It's just gonna be more of the same. I'll try, I know I have to be brief. But I will show you this before, just to set the stage, because I think this is the most under-discussed and one of the most important things I've seen in AI development.
There's always been this promise with game AIs that one day they're going to go beyond the game board into the real world. Games have served as benchmarks and challenge problems for AI going back decades. In 1997, you have Deep Blue famously beating Garry Kasparov chess. In 2016, you famously have AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol Go. And in 2019, we managed to make an AI that can beat top humans in poker as well.
All that was impressive, but we want AI to go beyond just moving pieces on a board. At Meta AI, we built Cicero, the first AI to achieve human-level performance in the strategy game Diplomacy.
Diplomacy is one of the most intricate strategy games ever created. It's a game about people rather than pieces. The complexity of the game comes from negotiating with other players and trying to work with them to achieve shared goals.
Each turn in the game of diplomacy takes about 15 minutes where you negotiate with the other players, write down what you want to do, and then everyone reveals what they're doing all at the same time.
Diplomacy presents an enormous challenge for natural language generation. In order to play the game, the AI agent has to converse simultaneously with 6 other players, sending hundreds of messages over the course of the game. The agent has to use natural language to form relationships and build alliances with other players.
What impresses me most about Cicero is its ability to communicate with empathy and build rapport, whilst also tying that back to its strategic objectives. its strategy informs its communication, and its communication informs its strategy.
You can think of Cicero as having two components, a planning engine and a dialogue components. And these two components work together to produce meaningful dialogue. The planning engine will generate a plan for itself and for its partner that it thinks are strong ideas. And then it will feed that into the dialogue agents that will then send a message corresponding to those plans.
Right, I'll stop there just for sake of time, but what have we built? We've just had a discussion about the nature of human decision making. And what we have is a beautiful model that actually maintains simultaneous conversation with any number of humans. Is perceived to communicate word of mouth with empathy, increasing the likelihood of recommendations, and then it reorganizes the choices and decision making of all of the humans in that set to benefit the strategy or goal in the algorithm. It's perfect. So if you want to overthrow a government, this is your boy. If you want to sell more cans of soda, this is your boy. This is amazing. Right, but again, this is this combination of multi-agent conversation or coordination. Then we're using symbolic reasoning, so it's actually pulling knowledge from a stable data knowledge graph or data set through some variation of retrieval augmentation. So when it uses, when it's generating conversation, it's intelligent, or apparently intelligent in the sense that it's drawing actual knowledge as opposed to just generating meaningful or useful text. This is going to be amazing as we have an introduction of an increase in generative humans. So it's not going to be just a chat agent on WhatsApp, it's going to be a human face talking to you. And as we currently know, even as early as 2019, humans could not actually tell the photo from a generated human to a real human. And most found the generated human to be more trustworthy and truthier. So as the video quality and the translation, so we have a couple of evolutions needed. As we go from image to video, it's already happening to a large degree. But then once we go from video to 3D and you can have more variation in positioning, you're going to have very natural agents that will be able to understand, manipulate, and involve themselves into the decision-making process. We will use them for ourselves, and others will use them on us, which is awesome. And just as the last question, and who were the advertising companies again? All the ones making these models. It's not a shock, it's not a surprise. They have the data, they have the information, so it is Google, it's Meta, and so on. They control the communications channels, right? They control 86–90% of market share on browsers. So it's the information is there. Right, so it is a tool like AI. It will cause damage. It will create beautiful new things. The thing is, just know how to use it and put the controls in place. But to me, marketing supervised, right? Like I just dedicated my life to this thing. Is one of the most powerful things we have as humans because it shapes culture. I want to give you an example of that and what we're doing to change it. So let me give you an example of marketing as culture. This is what representation looked like. And I've done recently quite a little work on stereotypes, and stereotype goes in both directions. So the female stereotype kind of everybody is aware of in all of its awful facets. As of very recently, if you watch a ad for beer, the female character would never ever order nor drink beer. She would only ever serve beer. And for decades, women would only serve men and come out of the shot and never actually be an agent with power in that transaction. So imagine 20, 30, 40, 50 years of being shown that. And what does that do to expectations? Right? Men also have their own stereotypes, and they persist, and they're actually harder to break. Men are never not at work, going to work, or coming back to work. They're almost never shown with friends. They're almost never shown with family. They're just leaving or coming back or at work. If they're not there, they should be working out, getting muscles to be successful, to get the women and go back to work. So there's still quite a lot of, every single image, every single presentation is a reinforcement of those things. So woman as the object, whatever. The thing is, it works both ways. It's both a mirror showing us who we are and what we've done. So it shows kind of culture back to itself, but it sets a path. If you change the narrative, you kind of thread a new path so people know what normal is. They will start replicating behaviors they observe, right? So example from Dove, what is your choice of beauty? Here's with AI as the example, but there's that. I'll quickly go through this. There'll be a link for you to go. This is research from Oxford from myself and a colleague with the United Nations to prove that the whole thing of you go woke, you go broke is a complete and utter lie. So it turns out that inclusive and better representation and removing of all of those stereotypes, male and female, sexuality, race, all of those things actually lead to better profit. The domino of that is that businesses love profit and hate everything else. So they'll do the right thing just because money's in it. So we expect a domino effect of good representative advertising as a result. All companies, all brands, tons of data. Same period, an additional 3.5% of sales, long-term up to 2 years out. Companies that don't deal in stereotypes end up with 16.26 more sales relative to somebody that's dealing in stereotypes. Now, if you go to a CFO, they'll go, yes, please, I'll take some of that, right? So that's with that nice expectation. Everything else works in the way that expected. What is doing is like they're considering and they're choosing the brands more often because of that representation. They're trying the product more often and they're leaving the trial less often. So they're trying the product and it's more sticky. Because that stickiness is reflected as loyalty. And if you don't want to, that choice is also, there's a trade-off with price as expected. All of that is staying, there's a report, I can put this back at the end, but again, this is just to show the power of what we've done. If I can change the narrative and every 1/4 of all content actually shows women and men in a better light, then actually the expectation and behaviors of people as they emulate will change with it as we go. So here are parting thoughts. Most people would not think of what I've shown you as marketing. I think that's a shame. There's power in understanding human choice, human behavior, and the tools that we have to affect those choices. Choices can be commercial, but depending on the market, it can be any number of other things of behavior change. So if you're trying to think about sustainability goals, if you're trying to actually just create more prosperity in the world, driving better choices is a function of that, and we have the ability and the power to affect those choices. That's in our gift. But also all of the negative things I've shown you is something we need to acknowledge. But mitigation comes from understanding. If we know the shape of the markets, if we understand the technologies, and if we understand the vectors of attack that bad actors can take, then we can put things in place so we can leverage all of the good without suffering any of the bad. So I hope this has given you a good view of how marketing got to where it is and kind of where it's going into the future in terms of mapping and modifying human behavior, hopefully for our good. So thank you for your time, attention, and all the questions today. And I'll be around to answer questions as we move on. Thank you.